Today we're going to talk about 5 reasons why the Bible is true and should be believed. So the first big one is obviously the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, who is Jesus, but that was promised to be after the line of David. So somebody after his seed in 2 Samuel 7:12, and that's exactly what happened. The Messiah was through the line of David. We see other prophecies being fulfilled, like in Genesis 12:2, God says to Abraham, "And I will make of you a great nation." And he did that. Israel became a great nation. We see that written about in the rest of the Old Testament. In Micah 5:2, we read, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, being small among the clans of Judah, out from you will come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient times." So this great ruler is going to come from Bethlehem. And in Matthew 2:1, we see that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. There's actually an interesting set of events that cause that to happen, but it happens. So he actually was born in Bethlehem, just like it was prophesied of this great ruler, or the Messiah. So the fulfillment of these prophecies speak to the truthfulness of the scriptures, that maybe there really is a God working through these prophets. So one really interesting discovery was in 1887, the Amarna letters were discovered, and they were letters from Canaanite kings. And these confirmed the existence of the Habiru, or Hebrew people. They called them the Habiru in their language, but it's very, very, very likely that they were speaking of the Hebrew people. So here's a few of the letters. In letter 366, the king of Akshaph comes to fight in coalition against the Habiru, or against the Hebrews. And what do we see in the Bible? We see that the king of Akshaph joins a coalition to fight a staged battle against the Israelites, but is killed. We see that in Joshua 11:1 and in Joshua 12:20. The second Amarna letter that is really interesting is letter 289. In this letter, the Habiru are handed the land of Shechem by its ruler Labayu. And in the Bible, there's no description of attack on Shechem, yet the Israelites are described as having full control over it in Joshua 24:1. So the Bible doesn't mention this fight over Shechem, but all of a sudden it's just part of the Israelites' land. Well, that actually lines up perfectly with what this Canaanite letter says, that they just simply gave the land over to the Israelites. Some more archaeological evidence is the Pool of Siloam that was discovered in Jerusalem that I actually saw last year. It was only discovered in 2004, but it's at the end of Hezekiah's tunnel at the very bottom. They had stopped digging, and then they kept digging in 2004 and found this Pool of Siloam, and it's really beautiful, and they're still digging it up even to this day. But it's mentioned in the book of John, but people thought, there's no way that's a real place. And then all of a sudden, boom, it gets uncovered. So it's things like this that testify to the truthfulness of the scriptures. So scientific evidence points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. It points to a Big Bang. Almost all scientists now agree that, yeah, the Big Bang is real. Why do they say that? Well, it has to do like the red shift in light and stars, and basically they can tell that stars are moving away from us, so that tells us that the universe is expanding, and if it's expanding, that means that it had a beginning point. So what does that mean? That means that our universe had a beginning. It has a cause, and that cause biblically is God. The Bible speaks of the universe having a beginning, so that scientific fact lines up with the Bible. Secondly is the design of the universe. So physicists acknowledge that if gravity was just a little bit weaker or a little bit stronger, or if the strong or weak nuclear forces were just a little bit different, our universe would cease to exist. So our universe seems to be designed. And what does that do? That points to a designer. And biblically, God is described as designing us and creating us. So I would say that big idea of design is found in the scriptures, and it's confirmed by science. So these things, you can chalk them up to chance, but you have really, really bad odds. It's much more likely that there was actually a designer, and that designer is God. So biblically, that lines up with what we've found in science. So these aren't just events that maybe one person saw and they just said, oh yeah, this happened. No, these are events that are witnessed by hundreds of people, like the resurrection of Jesus in 1 Corinthians 15 is described as being witnessed by 500 people. The Exodus, the great Exodus of the Israelites out of Egypt, that was witnessed by an entire nation. right? Pharaoh was chasing them, and they escaped. Hundreds of people witnessed this escape of the Israelites. So if these things were false, we would expect people to write about how they were false. And lastly, Jesus' miracles were done publicly. So many of his miracles were public. And a great example is the feeding of the 4,000 and the 5,000. 4,000 people witnessed that. These aren't just a few people that maybe are making up a story. No, these are huge, large public events which testify to its truthfulness. So we see this in a lot of different places, but one great example is women's testimonies at the resurrection. So women were the first ones to testify that Jesus resurrected, which is arguably the most important event in Christian history. It was women who were the first ones to testify, and in both Roman and Jewish cultures at the time, women's testimonies were not highly esteemed at all. So if you're going to make up a story, you wouldn't say that women were the first ones to see the most important event happen. Secondly, we see all throughout the Old Testament these main characters fail over and over and over again. We see David's failures, we see Solomon's failures, we see the whole nation of Israel rebel and be exiled because of it. We just constantly see these main characters fail. And if you're going to make up a story, you wouldn't make up a story in which all of your main characters fail, and yet they have to rely on the strength of Yahweh. So there's more that could be explored there, but ultimately when you read the Bible, it just doesn't seem like a story that's just made up. There's too many random details and things that you wouldn't want to include in a story that you are making up. For all these reasons, I think the Bible is true and tells a true story of God and humanity. And I think if any writing throughout all of history is worthy of your trust, it's the Bible. Thank you so much.